Hey everyone, it's Friday. Yeah, it's Friday. Welcome back to the wrap up. My name is Daniel, and these are my two co hosts, Agatha and Steve. Um, this week we're going to be talking about Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk 2077 just dropped, and it is a clusterfuck of like
Everything.
techno-orientalism is I think the topic of this episode, but also like poor game design, really terrible customer service, and refunds all over. Um, so we're going to be talking about Cyberpunk today. This is not the first sign of the wrap up turning into a video game show, but I think that what we see with Cyberpunk 2077 and the popularity of that genre has a huge effect on the tabletop gaming industry. I'm already seeing Kickstarters go up for Cyberpunk skirmish games, like miniature games. I mean, we have Cyberpunk Red, we have the Sprawl, we have the Veil. There are so many Cyberpunk games. And then there was this one that I shared with all of you on our Discord, and it was like, I forget what it was called, but it had like an Asian elf on it, and she was barefoot, kneeling, and she was holding a sigh. And I was like, this is.
It's called Amethyst Factions.
Thank you, Jeremy. And it was just great.
Did you
Thanks.
see her
It's for,
demure fingers?
it's
Just
for
like
5E.
Clutching the. Yeah, it was bad. So, what happens in the video game industry does have a huge effect on what happens in the TTRPG industry. So it's really important for us to talk about that. So today we're going to be talking about Cyberpunk 2077, the Cyberpunk genre, and how we might fix it, or what we think Cyberpunk should be moving forward. And like I said earlier, I'm joined by Agatha and Steve every single week, my co-hosts. You'll see now on our new logo, which is like super adorable.
So cute.
I love it. I love it so much. I've been like holding on to that, and I can't wait. And this time, Agatha and Steve helped me figure out the design. One of the things I love is that like all three of us look distinct on that logo. Steve, you still look buff, and that
jacked.
you still look jacked, and that honestly, and it's the same artist that Oshi Brochi on Twitter, same artist who did our Asians Read art. So the Oriental Adventures one, and the L5R one, the one that I gave specific instructions to make you look more buff because of feedback you gave me. Well, feedback your partner, I won't say your partner said you don't look buff enough in the initial art. And so now that artist knows, make Steve look buff. So yeah, we have new a new logo, a new show.
Yeah. I
And
do enjoy that Steve and we're almost like echoes of each other, except one is just more buff and that person is you.
When my girlfriend saw the logo, she pointed at Steve and was like, that's a guy, right? And then she was like, oh, because like the
ponytail?
ponytail.
Yeah.
yeah. I love it so much. But yeah, you know what? New logo and two new guests to the wrap up. We have Jeremy, writer,
Hello.
journalist extraordinaire, pixelgrotto.tumblr.com, Pixel Grotto on social media. You run one of the biggest Batman Instagram accounts in the world. It's pretty dope. You've
Yeah.
been on, all of our Asians Read L5R
Follow me
episodes.
to see all the photos I'm taking with Cyberpunk 2077 photo mode, which is pretty much half of my game time has just been devoted to that. I'm not playing this game for the right reasons.
You're playing it for the aesthetic.
Yes, the aesthetic.
And we'll talk about the aesthetic later.
yes,
Aesthetic and full width font with spaces in between. Aesthetic.
Oh God! But
With
Jeremy is
sparkle emoji.
Yeah.
Jeremy is back. Jeremy, I'm excited that you've joined us for this episode because you're also playing the game.
Yeah.
I have not given CD Projekt Red $90 yet for this game. I might in the future when it is in a playable condition. We have two new guests though, and I would love for you two to introduce yourselves. Let's start with Kiana. Kiana, who are you? I'm sure people recognize you, but who are you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kiana. My pronouns are she and they. I am a reoccurring face on the Asian represent scene. I kind of just pop up once in a while to cause drama at some points.
Yeah.
But I'm a TTRPG streamer and writer. Also, a background for me in terms of why I'm really interested in talking about this today. A lot of people don't know, I minored in philosophy studying AI ethics, and I also studied spec fic and specifically into how technology and artificial intelligence factor into humanity. So this is a genre and a topic I have been deeply involved in for a lot of my personal life and a lot of my academic life. So I'm excited to be here. And please tell me if I'm being too jargony. Because that will happen. Words will be thrown out, and you might need to tell me to tone it down.
I'm so good at it. I'll just be like,
hold
pause,
your brain.
pause.
Hold your brain, everyone. Hold your brain.
Oh, I will be so ready to ask all of the questions. Oh, this is exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait. And then Jamie, tell us about yourself, because you and I, this is the first time we've met.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. My name is Jamie. I use they, them pronouns. And let's see. Oh my gosh, like I love Cyberpunk. I love it so much that I thought, yeah, maybe I should just make a game, Cyberpunk, smash it in with Filipino folklore stuff. Fun fact, I made that game initially in 2 weeks because I thought, it can't be too hard. I was lying to myself, obviously, because I was trying to make it for the first session 0, and I really thought it'd be special if I had Baligbayan returning home ready for that. But ever since then, I've been super happy with how people have been liking the game. It's been really a lot of fun. I continue to work on it. It's really one of my favorite things, and in the conversations with people, it really tells me that Cyberpunk has so much potential, especially with Asian creators and diverse voices. So I'm here for all the Cyberpunk. I have very strong Cyberpunk feelings. I bleed Cyberpunk with that meaning too. So I'm really excited for today.
And Jamie, you're also a co-host, right, of a podcast?
That's right. I keep forgetting to mention that. I am a co-host of the Godlit podcast, where I get to just geek out about the games we play and the games that we'd like to play and stuff. So yeah, I when my health permits, I play like about 5 to 10 games a week. So I've gotten it down to 3 for but yeah, it's pretty intense. I love games. I really do.
Absolutely
A
superhuman.
whole show about like games we want to play is such a vibe.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. The list is so long. I play so much and I still have like this long growing list, which is a good sign, I think, lots of great games.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of games, why don't we get into the topic? Cyberpunk 2077 by
2010?
2010. Well, Cyberpunk 2020. Wait, that's the year we've been living in. We'll talk about that. I have some thoughts on that as well. But Cyberpunk 2077 by CD Projekt Red just dropped their follow-up to The Witcher 3, to a really weird reception. Critical acclaim by people who totally don't have a vested interest in writing a positive review of a game, and users who found the game to be completely unplayable. This game just dropped, and there's a lot of talk about, what's great about this game and what's not so great about this game. And one of the things that we want to talk about Cyberpunk 27 is how it handles Asian culture. And I say like Asian as it takes from like sort of like East Asia and kind of melds it all into an aesthetic. And that isn't something that, Cyberpunk 2077 invented. This has been a hallmark of the cyberpunk genre as a whole, and this idea of a Western anxiety about the East. On this show, we talk about Orientalism a lot, whether, explicitly, but we talk about Orientalism a lot, and we talk about how Orientalism is a way of framing power and Western power over its perceptions of Asia or the East. But in Cyberpunk, the relationship between Asia, and it's primarily just an aesthetic in Cyberpunk, really, the relationship between Asia and the West, where many Cyberpunk games are set, and I'm talking about North American Cyberpunk games. We'll talk about Asian Cyberpunk because that's a whole other conversation as well, is that, there is a fear of Asia, very much the same fear that was... that resulted in the Chinese Exclusion Act in the late, 19th century. the same kind of fear that resulted in like the model minority myth, the same kind of fear that we see right now. So Jeremy, you've played Cyberpunk 2077. You said you've played 8 hours, but like
Played for about I played for about 8 hours, mostly doing main story stuff, but I'm not that far. Like I haven't met Keanu Reeves yet because I've just been screwing around with the photo mode most of the time.
I feel like he's the only good thing in the game.
Oh, you took my good thing. That was the
that's the only good thing. I was about to say, like, the only reason why I would consider getting it is just like, I just want to talk to Keanu Reeves.
Oh, he's a great douchebag. He's great. But anyway,
yeah, I think so. My experience playing it so far has been there are things that I like, but I don't disagree with any of the negative reviews about it. It is a buggy experience. I'm running it on a 2015 gaming laptop, so I basically have to put everything on low. It doesn't look as good as it's supposed to, but I do get 30 frames per second, fairly consistent 30 frames per second. I got my first crash today. There are some weird bugs of just like NPCs glitching out. And from what I've seen about the game so far, it really feels like it could have used at least another 3 to 6 months in the kitchen.
Yeah. I mean, we're not here to talk about the culture of crunch in AAA games.
Yeah.
But it was like delayed 3 times.
It was delayed multiple times. It already had 8 years in the kitchen. Probably a large portion of that time was thrown out and restarted. But it's a buggy game. The main story is less buggy than the open world stuff, but I think a lot of the kind of Asian representation and feel of the game as it pertains to Asian people, Asian cultures, is stuff that's going to come out in the open world side quests and whatnot. So I mean, it's I come from the perspective that I loved all the Witcher games despite their flaws. Witcher 3 was kind of like the game I had imagined playing as a little kid. And that whole series kind of got me out of a difficult place because I started playing them when I went through a bad breakup, and they really helped me just dive into a fantasy world. And that series as well has some problematic things in there. And I feel like CD Projekt Red, we were talking about this before the stream started, bit off a lot more than just the Witcher games, and they just haven't been able to chew all of that, all of what they've bitten off, and we're seeing it now with the reception that the game has been receiving.
Yeah, I mean, like with The Witcher, they had all of the books to work off of. So it wasn't like they had to come up with the backstory and a world or anything like that.
They didn't have to come up with the backstory here. They had Cyberpunk 2020. But I think with the Witcher game...
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Like, I think with the Witcher games are ultimately a fairly condensed and simple story, just about one guy, Geralt, just stuff happening to him, and there's a few other key characters, and it's a narrative mainly about him, and it's not really until you get to the third game, and even just the main quest of the third game, not the expansion packs or anything. It's not even like a massive, necessarily epic story, and it deals from a lot of themes like Polish mythology, like Polish geography, like it's Polish fantasy. Cyberpunk 2077 is not Polish fantasy. There's representation of a lot of other genres and a lot of other things going on right now in this game, and yeah.
And that's why I think that despite having source material for 2077, they had a much harder task with the current game, because one of the things that we're going to talk about on this stream is that the cyberpunk genre is very much based on human fear, and human experiences. So that said, like when designing a game set within the cyberpunk genre, like what do we look for? And I don't say us as like Asian creators, Asian fans. I want to start with like, what do we think cyberpunk is based on the current landscape of what has been created, right? And Agatha and I long ago did an episode of the Asians Represent podcast with Banana Chan about cyberpunk. But I think so much has changed since then. In the world, like we're living through a global pandemic that I think an updated conversation on cyberpunk is necessary. So like I'll start.
You guys get an appearance from my puppy, by the way.
Oh.
Just here to talk about the cyberpunk
You're
things.
blessed.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, it just looked up.
so cute.
Those ears.
She'll join us for maybe a little bit until she starts yipping.
I can't be mad. Cyberpunk
Yeah.
2077 is fine now.
Okay, it's
Everything's
fine.
okay.
I
No more
was about to
complaints.
say that.
Jeremy, all you have to say is like, oh yeah, CD Projekt Red sent me a puppy because I complained about
Yeah.
Cyberpunk, and
I don't know
have
if there
a
are
puppy.
dogs in the game. Like, there's a whole thing where like there's not that
Well,
much
there's a cat
wildlife
you can
around.
pet though.
Not
Oh,
in Night
it's a
City. There
cat.
is a cat. There's a cat you can pet.
Yeah, because my partner passed by, we were like, try
Yeah.
to.
You can pet the cat in Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
I don't know about the dog.
Yeah, I haven't seen a dog yet. Keanu is a hot dog. Anyway, no, I'm not gonna go there. Sorry.
I just,
I do have a hot dog.
I do really. You, that's right. You do, Keanu. That's. Oh, I do love. Oh, you got me distracted by Keanu Reeves. I just rewatched John Wick. Oof.
Oh, he's so good. He's so good.
But anyways, I want to start with just like, so what are some like hallmarks of Cyberpunk that we think? Like when we think about Shadowrun, because I know Steve, you're playing Shadowrun. When we think about Blade Runner, when we think about Agatha, go ahead.
For me, when I think about Cyberpunk, I think about jacking into the system, like going into the internets with your mind.
Like
That's-
the Matrix.
Yeah, or just like something, and then you stick it in the back of your skull, and then you do some like, and then it becomes a visualization of you like punching, excuse me, things like you're hacking into a system.
So like human integration with technology. So the
Yeah.
divide.
Oh
Between,
yeah, I guess that's a better way
so
of
the
putting
divide
it.
between humans and technology becomes blurred. Okay, so that's one thing.
Human mind and technology.
Human, but I mean also the human-
consciousness.
but also the human body, right? Because a
Right,
big part
right.
of the cyberpunk aesthetic, and I say aesthetic specifically because there is less nuanced conversation now in cyberpunk, is the concept of cybernetic enhancements. For me, another one is this a society of control, a culture of control, and you should be, rising up against it. I think it was Peter, one of our mods, is constantly saying on the Discord that like the punk in Cyberpunk is just no longer punk.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that. But for me, it's like, a culture and a society of control where the state and the idea of capital or capitalism is a unified front that acts against the people. Right? These corporations are evil. The government, if it exists, is a puppet for these corporations, and it's evil. And all actors of the states, all agents of the state, are acting, against the well wishes of the common folk. That's what I see as another, sort of hallmark of cyberpunk, at least in the West. Any of you want to add anything to that? So far, again, the lines between what is human and what is technology are blurred. We have a society or culture of control. Anything else we want to add?
Yeah, actually, Kiana, so you've talked about AI stuff, and I'm thinking about the game Omemaker that you worked on. So
Yeah.
something in my mind is the question of the soul, right? So the very easy thing of the ghost in the machine. Do I still have a soul if I'm mostly a machine? But what interests me in Cyberpunk is also the question of why do we only attach a soul to something organic, right? My favorite Cyberpunk stories are the ones where the AI sort of forms its own definition of soul. How do you feel about that though, Kiana? I'd love to hear your
Yeah,
thoughts.
no, absolutely. I think it's going off of the intersection of where human and technology meet. It's looking at where does sentience and a lot of rights, if we're also tying into the control section, who has rights, what are rights, and where does sapience lie within all of that. And going beyond sentience, right? If something conscious and thinking, and into sapience in terms of is it assumably human, or is close to human, and how does that fit in, and what does that make us question about where we are, and if your robots happen and end up being oh whoops, they actually do have sapience and souls and stuff, what does that mean for how we treat them? And we use that as a mirror in terms of, when we talk about genre, we use that as a mirror to look at our modern day, as most spec fic should. That's definitely a big part of that for sure.
So it's almost like that blurring of human and technology has resulted in this fear that the human subject has become a useless category, or it's dissipating as a category of a way to view the world, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like a disappearance of selfhood, right? Of human.
Yeah.
And also it's like the individual against the corporation. When you become just like a sea, like one in a sea of numbers, then are you like, what makes you human and what makes
you special or something of worth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess that's where the punk should be coming in, where that's like, so I guess supposedly Cyberpunk is supposed to be about you railing against this kind of washing away of personal identity, like whether it's from the machine or from the corporations who just want to put you into a cog in their system for making money or creds, then that's where the punk comes in.
Yeah,
I have one thing that, I mean, you guys have all very well defined what cyberpunk is in essence, but I have something that cyberpunk kind of is in the media that represents it, which is extreme appropriation of Asian imagery, often not necessarily involving Asian people, coming from like Blade Runner, where you have Harrison Ford and a whole bunch of other white people walking around a world that is clearly supposed to be influenced by a futuristic Tokyo, born out of the 1980s when there was a fear of the Japanese bubble economy. You have other media like Ghost in the Shell, both the original anime film and the Scarlett Johansson remake, live action remake.
The best Asian actress.
Yeah, where the backdrop is just Hong Kong. They filmed Scarlett Johansson, Ghost in the Shell when I was in Hong Kong. I ate at one of the diners that's in like one of the shots. And you have this fascination with a lot of, Kowloon walled city in Hong Kong. We were talking about it in our Discord previously, often used as basically kind of like salad dressing for like just the background imagery in a lot of cyberpunk cities. And in Cyberpunk 2077, you have, signs in Chinese and Japanese everywhere. You have parts of the city. There's like a little China, a little Tokyo, very much influenced by kind of this 80s vibe of like, oh no, the Asian tigers, those countries in East Asia are growing and they're overtaking America. A cyberpunk future, a dangerous future, would be one when Japan is all powerful and there are corporations like the Arasaka Corporation in Cyberpunk 2077, Cyberpunk Red, and the original RPG Cyberpunk 2020 that has, a firm grip on everything around the world.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Can I quickly just jump in? Because one of the things that I'm so disturbed by when I watch Cyberpunk 2077. So my partner, when he plays, he jokes around as he drives around. He just goes, Manila, Manila. Because I can take pictures through Google, street maps, whatever, and just put it side by side. There's so many parts of Cyberpunk 2077 that look exactly like Cubao, or parts of the Ortigas area, or parts of Quezon City, or the older parts of Makati. And so it feels so unreal to me because I associate cyberpunk with late stage capitalism, like eating itself and then turning on the people and stuff like that. But when I look at my architecture here, right, because CD Projekt Red said, oh, we were inspired by brutalist architecture, so on and so forth. But the reason why so much of my city is brutalist is because we had an influx of money around the 70s and 80s, right? And so that stayed, but we sort of stagnated thanks to colonial control and being unable to move forward on our own and being scarred in that way. So we're stuck in that moment, right? And so when I look at the video game and I feel like they just took parts of what I know is reality and then they misconstrued it and they just completely removed the heart of it. And it's so upsetting for me to see it, to see the character move around in it. It's something that I really, really deeply dislike. So, and it's such a weird part of the aesthetic for me, if I'm going to be honest. Yeah.
So part of that is kind of how I view cyberpunk. So cyberpunk has changed throughout the years, obviously. But if you were to ask someone today in a vacuum what cyberpunk is, it is now, at this point, in my opinion, completely, you cannot separate it from the Orientalism of it. The aesthetic and the themes are too close together. And if you take one away, you've created a new genre, or you're leading to a different genre. So unfortunately, although cyberpunk used to be kind of this melding of machine and this punk aesthetic and who has power and whatnot, cyberpunk as it exists today is really about how can Asians be erased in a way that's palpable to Western audiences who want to feel like they're liberal and progressive.
I might disagree with you there, Steve.
I'm welcome that. I'll welcome that.
I don't think Asian erasure or the appropriation of Asian imagery is actually a recent thing in cyberpunk. Like the appropriation of Asian imagery and the use of Asian motifs and maybe even themes, like the idea of like street samurai and all of that's very much rooted in the origins of cyberpunk. Because cyberpunk as a genre is very simply a way of dramatizing the fear of a couple of things. The fear of capitalism. It's the fear of this loss of humanity and freedom. But it's also this fear of Asian domination. This fear of this Eastern wave coming to the West, taking jobs, taking industry away.
Yeah,
right.
That's a good correction, because when I say recent, my mind goes back to Blade Runner, the original, which was actually in the 80s. And that's not really in the zeitgeist like recent. But I do know that Cyberpunk does go farther that I haven't really touched on, but like to the 60s and whatnot. At least from what I've seen so far.
I think a big part of Cyberpunk is basically like the consequences of an other ascending power and visually changing Los Angeles, like the setting of the Blade Runner films, visually changing North America, creating, a certain type of aesthetic that, in Cyberpunk 2077, your first melee weapon is a katana, and, everybody has katanas.
Yeah.
And even in Asian cyberpunk media, once again, Ghost in the Shell, Cowboy Bebop, Mars is once again just Hong Kong. Like it literally is just based off of Hong Kong. Except for the Cowboy Bebop movie where they made Mars into New York City, which was a very interesting intentional change that they said that they decided to do because they wanted it to look different because it was a movie. So I don't know.
And I mean, and if we're gonna go back, we're talking like we can go back to Philip K. Dick's "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep." I think that was published in like the late '60s, and then of course there's Blade Runner and Neuromancer, which were in the '80s. But like, I mean, the early hallmarks of cyberpunk were like that film noir meets gritty sci-fi realism, right? I think sci-fi realism is a really important thing to talk about here, because those cyberpunk cities are like, they're dark, they are ever dangerous, and they have massive income inequality. There are huge industrial towers, giant neon billboards, and these mega corporations, which people were very afraid of in the 80s, right? People were very afraid of, people of color. Let's put that out there too, right? People were afraid of those people. People were afraid of rapid growth. But the aesthetic and the mega corporations also can be traced to a French comic by an artist named Mobius called The Long Tomorrow. So if you look up The Long Tomorrow, and if you're watching in chat or you're watching on YouTube, and you look that up, that's cyberpunk right there. That's the aesthetic. But The Long Tomorrow came out in 1975, right? So the context in which all of these themes that we've talked about so far, the context in which all of them played a huge role in people's fears, and which made cyberpunk feel like a real and compelling genre at the time for people who weren't Asian, we'll say that, right? Are these fears still the same fears that we have? Because in many ways, we're living in the actuality.
This is a cyberpunk world.
We're living in a highly integrated technological system of control, right? We're living in the future that the people of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s feared, right? If you look at like Facebook was sued recently for allegedly spying on Instagram users through the use of their cameras. And I don't know why Facebook would want to do that, because if they spy on me looking at Instagram, it's going to be like this. And I'm just going to constantly scroll and then occasionally double tap and like something. But Facebook was doing that. We go to countries like China. China has a social ranking system, and they spy on people there, right? You are constantly being watched. So we are living in that cyberpunk future that everyone was talking about. Yet, the modern cyberpunk aesthetic is still rooted
in the 80s,
60s,
70s.
And it isn't really relevant anymore. And so this makes that use of Asian themes that you talked about, Steve, feel really disconnected, especially when we're living in a time where everybody plays games, where everybody interacts with cyberpunk.
You've kind of summed up like some of the main kind of thematic issue that Cyberpunk 2077 has, Daniel, right there. And reviews have pointed this out too. You know, it's dad rock, not new wave. It is rooted in that image of Cyberpunk from Cyberpunk 2020, which came out in like the early 90s. It is not progressive.
Yeah. And there are still
really
ways to
at
make
all.
some of these themes feel relevant, right? Mr. Robot, a fantastic cyberpunk show. You might not consider it cyberpunk because there's nothing neon, but that feels very relevant. The movie Upgrade is, I think, a really good cyberpunk movie because I mean, I love it because it's also a body horror movie, but also the loss of autonomy feels relevant. But that said, like, you know, there are major problems in cyberpunk rooted in fears of Asia, rooted in fears that are very much part of our daily lives now. So, like, how do we move past this, right? Because, Steve, you're playing Shadowrun, and I'd love for you to talk about your Shadowrun experience so far, because some people are going to think, well, Shadowrun can move past this because there are, like, elves and trolls and magics. Shadowrun isn't the cyberpunk of the 80s.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack for Shadowrun. But before I do that, I want to plant a seed with Jeremy, actually, because I know you're playing Cyberpunk 2077.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What you described with, like, you know, it's your dad's rock and whatnot, this, like, harken back to that nostalgia. You described a lot of how I feel about Ready Player One. And
yeah, absolutely.
And Ready Player One has, like, a lot of these things that I felt were handled very ungracefully, very clumsily. On top of being just not a great film that I didn't really enjoy.
I think there are certain similarities there, both with Ready Player One, the film, and Ready Player One, the book, which, and apparently the sequel, Ready Player Two, delves even heavier into the whole cyberpunk thing. Yeah, there's definitely, playing through it, it's basically, it feels like the devs, their main idea of what cyberpunk is not anything that, you know, Jamie or Kiana or any of us just talked about. It's really like the source book in Cyberpunk 2020, and melee attacks with a katana. Here, you know, here's Asian looking stuff, and that's a big part of the game. It's not the entirety of the game. There are some well-written things in the game, and I think there are moments where you feel like there's potentially something deeper here, and this could have been really good. And maybe there are parts, you know, in side quests or other parts in the main story that I haven't got to yet that actually are very good. But ultimately, it is your dad's vision of cyberpunk. It is not kind of evocative of the 2020 reality that we live in right now, and what, you know, cyberpunk kind of needs to evolve into, I think, at least in my opinion, as someone who does enjoy the genre, but often feels like it's being held back by its own limitations, or at least the limitations as interpreted by the type of folks that made Cyberpunk 2077.
Yeah.
And one other seed I'm going to plant here is actually, Agatha, your original description of cyberpunk, the whole, like, jacking in, the whole, like, machine and humans kind of, like, so, like, right now I'm wearing contact lenses. Like, I have little pieces of plastic in my eye right now. They're sitting on my eyeballs, and
Body
that's how
mods. That's contact lenses are like a body mod.
So without getting too gory about it, you know, I actually have a lot of tension about getting laser eye surgery, despite the fact I actually have a friend who had laser eye surgery and his life is significantly better. You know, he's a father now, and he thinks that if he didn't get laser eye surgery, it'd actually be harder to be a father. And I'm like, wow, what, like, an interesting place to be in. And I have so much to say about what it means to have technology inside or adjacent to your body. But Daniel, I'm going to answer your question. I promise.
Yeah, I was about to say, Steve, are you, like, deflecting? Come on.
So to chat, yes, I am a cyborg. But for the actual question of Shadowrun, I can take it from many different lenses, but let's take it from the Orientalist lens. And let's talk about where Asians appear in Shadowrun. So I played Shadowrun from 4E all the way up to 6E. I skipped 5E. So basically, I played 3, 4, and 6. Asians really only show up in the sexy roles, and primarily women tend to be in the sexy roles. They're either the femme fatales or they're the elves, who are written within the narrative to always be attractive to everyone, just kind of universally. So they are written to be kind of these people who are kind of ethereal, beautiful, and I think that really kind of gets into this whole like fetishization of like this Asian aesthetic. It seemed like a very interesting way to tackle maybe like at the root of fear, of the unknown, and to tackle it and to kind of categorize its power and basically take it away. And this is all focusing just on women and femme presenting folks within the cyberpunk aesthetic in Shadowrun.
Yeah,
And
it
we get
very
to
much
Ben.
like separates it from that past fear of Asia. I mean, Donald Trump has obviously incited so much fear in Asia, but that's a different conversation. But it kind of separated it from, being an aesthetic meant to scare you into just simply being, as you say, an aesthetic to maybe make you horny.
Yeah, I've said it many times. If your RPG doesn't make you horny, what's the point?
Put that on your book. That's
But
the
what
DM Steve quote.
The other thing I want to talk about from an Orientalist point of view for Shadowrun is that the women are clearly in this kind of two-way street. You're either on the spectrum of being femme fatale or the ethereal geisha is how I'm going to coin that term. But if you're a man, your options are actually really limited, and it's only up until 4E that are really changed. So a great exercise is to look up troll Asian Shadowrun, because if you look at trolls generally in Shadowrun, they are big, huge. They're clearly a power fantasy. They have big tusks. They basically look like Ron Perlman, but like 4 Ron Perlmans squished together in one meat suit. And so you have like white-coated Hellboy, and then if you find an Asian one, what you find is that their horns are smaller, their teeth are smaller, their bodies are smaller. Yeah, absolutely. A great example. Someone actually mentioned this to me. All the Asian trolls kind of look like Quill from X-Men, but like the movie X-Men, where all of like their horns and stuff are like very small pines. They don't have horns. They don't have those dermaposits. They're all just kind of like smaller, and they look kind of weaker, and they look like more effeminate. And that is a huge problem rooted in a lot of kind of the peril that Daniel had kind of alluded to.
Wow.
So that's Shadowrun from an Orientalist point of view. And
I feel so bad about that, because when I did play Shadowrun, I always played a troll, and like I never saw enough of the art to realize that was a thing that was happening. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, and I could go on and on, because like trolls in Shadowrun, the femme presenting trolls, they've really only taken 2. I've only actually seen one aesthetic really for trolls that are femme presenting, and they're big, they're huge, but all of their generally feminization attributes, like their breasts, are completely wildly over exaggerated. Like you will never see an A-cup woman troll ever in Shadowrun.
What a sentence.
Yeah, what a sentence.
Out of context, beautiful.
You'll also never
put that in the book.
you'll also never see a fat troll in Shadowrun. Wonder why that is.
Which brings me to my beef with the Cyberpunk 27 character creator. They said that you could make your own version of V, the main protagonist. You could be who you want to be in Night City, and you really can't. V is not really a slate for you to project your own image onto and modify as you want. The character creator has a lot of different jaws, but is oddly limited in many other areas. You can't change body type at all, and the whole tying pronouns to your gender thing is a really bad move. That, like, I guess they did it to save on recording voice lines, but it's not a good look for the game at all.
Yeah.
No, I think it's really bad how your pronouns have to be tied to if your voice sounds quotation mark feminine or if your voice sounds masculine, and then that is tied to the romances you can have also.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just
So like, with the character creator, you can kind of create like a trans person, but the pronoun thing really ruins that, because they tied your pronouns to voice, and there's only 2 sets of, it's only binary pronouns, and I just feel like what a step back. Like, I don't know when they made that decision, but it feels like it was a decision that was made a long time ago.
For sure. And
Yeah.
I think I want to kind of take that and tie it back into Cyberpunk as a genre. So a lot of what cyberpunk can do as a specific genre in sci-fi is look at the deconstruction of the self. So we already talked about the deconstruction of the barrier between humanity and technology, but there's also the deconstruction of who you are by the other, but also voluntary deconstruction of yourself or your perceived self into something else. So a lot of what could have been very powerful about a very in-depth character creator was to deconstruct the concepts of time, body parts to gender, and appearance to all of that. Or deconstructing, gender in general, like fuck the gender binary. There's so many interesting things you could be doing in a world where, if your technology is this advanced, deconstructs the thing between organic and inorganic. And for a lot of people, especially in Western canon, that is a terrifying thought. To think all of Western philosophy is based around the idea that you as a self are a thing, immutable and sacred in some sense. And there has been tons of debate in the hundreds of years that philosophy has existed as to whether that's the case or not. A lot of where we are right now is the hope that, who we are is something that is separate from something else. Like it is separate from our body, separate from perception, like we are ourselves. And the concept that technology or a corporation or anything else could take that away from you was a huge fear of the roots of cyberpunk, right? The huge fear that, oh man, if we keep adding body parts like cybernetics, which there's a whole thing about cybernetics, but if we keep adding technology to our bodies, like, oh man, when do we stop being ourselves?
Yeah.
And people get really freaked out by that. And it's really interesting because if you look at other philosophies from other parts of the world, that's not a fear at all. It's an extremely Western look at the self and who you are and that self-identification. So I think we have to understand that cyberpunk as a genre has the power, especially now that we're not living in an Asian, like we talk about how our world is very similar to the cyberpunk futures that we were told about. But I think a major thing is that we are globalized, but we are not Asian dominated that they feared. The globalization is much more complex. Obviously there are superpowers from Asia who are involved, but the superpowers of North America is incredible in that, and how that influences things now too. And we still have that fear still instilled in it when cyberpunk as a genre should be shifting away from that.
Yeah, you could even go the route of like Firefly, if any of you watched Firefly, and it's literally set in a future where Asia is one of the major like space powers, and there's Asian influences everywhere. People swear in Chinese. Well, they did that so they could get away with swearing on cable TV. But also, like, there are no Asian people who ever appear in Firefly. They kind of did a bad thing there. You say that, and like my biggest example of this crisis of self that you talked about, Kiana, when it comes to technology and integrating technology, is one of the protagonists of Appleseed, Briareos. Briareos is a soldier who gets so extremely wounded in battle that he basically is more machine than man. And he struggles with this, and this is a part of his character. But when I look to Appleseed, I look to Ghost in the Shell, and how the Major in Ghost in the Shell, this is one of the things that she struggles with. And it's actually one of the themes that they brought about kind of in the live action movie. And it's something that they talk about I know that there are so many people who love Altered Carbon, which is also guilty of all the things that we're talking about too. And this crisis of self. I think that, as a side, I think one of the worst things about Altered Carbon was that they basically took what could have been a really cool Asian main character and they just picked a boring white dude. But then when I started tweeting about that, so many people, and people who are cyberpunk creators in the TTRPG space, were like, but that's what the books did. Don't care.
Don't care.
Could have done something cool like in season 2, but I didn't want to watch season 1, so I'm not going to watch season 2 with Anthony Mackie. But anyways, before we I kind of want to shift how I was kind of progressing this conversation, because I wanted to talk about what we imagine to be the new aesthetic for Cyberpunk. But first thing I want to talk about is like how we can reconcile for how primarily Japanese anime and video games have embraced the Cyberpunk genre, right? Because there's this paradox, at least on the surface. There's this paradox of Cyberpunk being rooted in fears of Asia. Yet there are all these Asian properties that we've talked about, like Ghost in the Shell, Akira, Appleseed, that are Cyberpunk.
Yeah, Bubblegum Crisis.
Bubblegum Crisis.
Like,
so how do we
yeah.
reconcile for that?
Yeah. And I just want to say,
go ahead.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to say really quickly, like, and this is a thing, like when I was listening to everyone talk about Cyberpunk and, because I know a lot of it is based on Mona Lisa Overdrive or Philip K. Dick or all these other things. But my Cyberpunk has always been very anime like built, right? That was like my first real introduction to it. And I didn't read Do Angine Stream of Electronic Sheep, and I didn't watch Blade Runner until the director's cut was already out, so
I mean, that's the only version of Blade Runner that exists.
That's the only good version.
The Harrison Ford monologue is pretty bad. But so like when I think Cyberpunk, when I was writing Balikbayan and everything, it really kept coming back from that anime thing. And so it has its own problems where instead of fighting against the corporation, it's more this imperialist kind of nationalism, kind of, right? It has its own set of problems. But I think to what you were talking about, Daniel, like one of the big issues was a lot of us were not happy about Scarlett Johansson being, the major, right? But a lot of people from Japan were like, no, it's cool.
Yeah.
I like it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like that really encapsulates the tension and the problem, right? Like when I think about the anime, when I think about Bubblegum Crisis, because I rewatched like the original version in 2040 recently.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a lot of the cyberpunk themes that I really, really like, because I don't know if there is no fear of the body, like Kiana pointed out, right? Like, even though the major struggles in Ghost in the Shell with, is she still really a person? The interesting thing is like Bato, the character who was also extremely mechanized, he has no problems. He just sees himself as a human being. He struggles with his feelings for the major and a lot of yearning. And then Toga, the guy who's completely human and won't even use anything more advanced than a six bullet shooter. We see how he really has to like push himself, and he really doesn't operate on the same level of proficiency as the rest. So it's really interesting, right? Like Toga has to struggle with, is he the heart of the team? Is he the intuition of the team? But also still respecting, like, yeah, you can choose to not, engage with these aspects. So for me, like when I think of like the Asian cyberpunk or the anime cyberpunk, it's so removed from those fears, while like taking on the aesthetic and bringing it up to like 100, right? Like it just goes aesthetic upon aesthetic upon aesthetic, right? But I'd love to hear everybody else's thoughts for sure.
I want to dive in right now because, Jamie, there's a video on YouTube called How Not to Adapt a Movie. And it specifically takes Ghost in the Shell, the newest iteration of Scarlett Johansson, and the anime. And the main thesis of the video is that if you watch Ghost in the Shell, the anime, the creators, the artists, the creative directors, they love their city. They love everything about it. They know it's not perfect, but they truly do love their space. And if you look at Ghost in the Shell, the Scarlett Johansson version, I shouldn't call that. This is me directing hate towards a casting choice. But if you look at that, those creators hate their city. They think it's hostile. They think that all this stuff that's in it, that would be the cyberpunk aesthetic, are roots and sources of fear and oppression. And that take on that is so nuanced. The video is only 7 minutes long. It doesn't get into it, but as myself viewing it, that spoke volumes as to why the remake may be so uncomfortable.
There's that, and I think there's a really obvious difference between, I say, Japanese cyberpunk and Western cyberpunk. And the big difference, and it's kind of been sitting right in front of us, The big difference is that Japanese cyberpunk treats the state differently than does the West, right? In the West, all the protagonists, if you look at like, the Blade Runners, they are counter-hegemonic characters. They are against the state. They might collaborate or work with them, but their ultimate goals are against the state. But in Japanese cyberpunks, if you look at like Duna Newt and Briarios from Appleseed, if you look at the entirety of Section 9 in Ghost in the Shell, they are a part of the state apparatus.
Yeah, they serve the state.
They serve the state. And that doesn't mean that the state is good, because the state is certainly a bad actor against society. But in Japanese cyberpunk, you see members of the state act as good and act in the best interest of the people. So in Japanese cyberpunk, the state isn't this like unified front, like I said earlier. The state is fractured between oppressors and members of this oppressive apparatus that act with the social welfare of the people in mind, or act against it within that structure, right? And I think that's a huge difference between Asian cyberpunk and Western cyberpunk. Right?
I think one thing that Asian cyberpunk does potentially better than some Western cyberpunk also, and I know Steve was bringing this up in the chat, there's this other side to cyberpunk that is kind of investigating a feeling of loneliness. Where does the humanity end and the machine begin? How human am I? What is humanity? How do I exist in this massive, technologically oriented city dominated by artificial intelligence, mega corporations, so on and so forth? And I think, stuff like Ghost in the Shell kind of investigates that a little bit better than certain other Western cyberpunk media. However, I do think that with Ghost in the Shell, like with Section 9, oftentimes both the manga and the anime and the movies that have resulted from that franchise have kind of been more interested in sort of telling detective tales, noirish tales, using that cyberpunk backdrop.
Definitely.
Delving into tech porn, basically. Like the original Ghost in the Shell manga is just tech porn. It's got like 50 pages of endnotes in the back, just talking about, it's the creator's world building. He's like, I made this gun look this way because I predicted that, guns will look this way by 20 something. And I feel as if occasionally, specifically Japanese cyberpunk, often falls into that trap, or I wouldn't call it a trap, just a tendency. And you're not really talking about marginalized voices, having to go up against a government or a big corporation, or having their stories be told. That punk side of things is often minimized in a way that is different from Western cyberpunk, but still present. Like Japanese cyberpunk is very much about the aesthetic, full width font, spaces. Not always, but sometimes, I feel.
Yeah. It's definitely a lot more. There's definitely a lot more nuance in what resistance looks like there.
Yeah.
That said, like, what is the new aesthetic for cyberpunk? What can we envision for our present moment, right? What kind of future can we imagine? We're living in the cyberpunk future that they imagined in the 80s, the 60s, and 70s. We're living in that, right? Like, I went out today to go get groceries. I had to wait in line outside of the grocery store because we have a global pandemic. I had a watch on that not only told me the time, but told me when I got a text message, allowed me to send a text message, like was monitoring my heart rate and everything. And I had a tiny little thing in my ear that let me listen to Taylor Swift's new album, right? But like, whoa, was that hand sign about Taylor Swift's new album?
100% it was. 100%.
Stream's over.
Look, I love a good T Swift song while I'm lifting when I could go to a gym. But this newest album, I'm just like, all right.
Look,
dial down that hate.
Whoa. I think context is really, that's the album. We needed that album. It felt like
We did.
it felt like Taylor Swift wrote that in quarantine. It's like Shawn Mendes' new album. Shout out to Scarborough.
Fair. I had unfair expectations because what I was looking for were like bangers, like the thing that like lets me feel flow.
You wanted 1989. You wanted 1989.
Exactly, because my connection with that album, with Taylor Swift's art, is that I listen to what I'm lifting because it gives me a sense of like flow. But if it's going to be something any more than that, then obviously I can't connect with it.
And but I also think that like this Taylor Swift album, this became a stream about Taylor Swift. Taylor, call me.
Oh my god.
Taylor Swift is the ultimate cyberpunk. Yeah,
Wow.
that's the takeaway.
But I think that like this Taylor Swift album is different because this is her exploring the last two albums have been her exploring themes that aren't just breakups.
Yeah, it's some good stuff.
There's some, and I think that's great. Also, like her latest music video, an Asian dude was the love interest,
And he and
he's a dancer.
they were hot.
Yeah.
Super hot.
Can we
Yeah.
just-
I'm gonna need a link for that. For research purposes.
long-haired Asian guy.
Long hair
Yeah.
Asian guy. Yeah,
So
research purposes.
hot.
Research purposes.
And really, really nice shoulders.
Yeah, that-
Really
Yeah,
that-
nice.
yeah, true fact.
Yeah, true fact. So somebody link that in the chat for Steve.
For research
For
purposes.
research purposes. But anyways, like we are living in that cyberpunk future. Like I had all this technology so integrated. I was wearing my chest fanny pack and everything. Like this is the world that people envisioned decades ago.
Also, the '80s aesthetic is big now.
And the
So,
80s
like,
aesthetic is big.
even more so. You know.
Yeah. So like what our 21st century concerns are different from those of the late 20th century, right? So what is cyberpunk in the future? Is climate change a central theme? Is it like enviropunk? I don't know what. Is it climate change
Yes,
punk? Climate,
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah,
Climate punk?
Kiana, I'd love to hear your take on this.
So, fun thing about Blade Runner, and specifically about its source material, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. It takes place in a world where every single living creature that isn't a human is dead. There are no animals. Or what animals do exist, they only exist because rich people want them. They are exotic. Like even a normal sheep is an exotic. If it's organic and alive, it is an exotic thing. And if we look at any form of current cyberpunk genre, like we never question why it's always gray, or it's always nighttime, or it's always rainy. Environmentalism, like it's been baked in, and it's something that we don't explore enough. And I think it's really interesting because if you look at the Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, it's extremely not Asian fears. Part of it from when it was written, it's about the U.S. and Soviet powers, which is very different. But yeah, I think a lot of we kind of, as the genre has gone on, we've kind of drawn away from the environmentalism part of it. But a huge part of the capitalism and the fear of the mega corporation was the exploitation of the earth and the loss of, again, organics and life and all of that to fuel what is this world that is represented by grays and ever expanding metropolis. We never talk about farming in cyberpunk.
Yep.
Farms and
Blade Runner
land don't exist.
2049
Yeah,
sort of did that in the very beginning.
A little
Oh,
bit.
They're
yeah,
like-
that was a
but
good
not,
point.
The
not hugely.
protein farms, right? Where we or whatever.
The scene where we killed our only Asian presenting person.
Yeah.
Ouch, ouch,
Woo!
ouch.
I
Sorry.
love Blade Runner. That series is one of my favorite movies. Problematic as fuck, but like definitely my favorite movies and why I started enjoying cyberpunk anyway. But yeah, I think future cyberpunk is going to be delving more into the impacts of the world, where I think we're going to, rather than seeing pollution being a huge part of it, which was the huge part of the aesthetic of the 80s cyberpunk, we're going to be starting to look at flooded worlds. We're going to be starting looking at extreme fires and
Wait, extreme
environmental
fires, that's
disasters.
happening right now.
Yeah, I know. We're going to be looking at the
Yeah.
impacts of years of that happening, right? Like what parts of the world are going to become the centralized because they are safe from extreme weather experiences like that. What parts of the world will not, right? And where does technology fit into that? It's going to be really interesting to see where our genre kind of takes us there.
It's going to be very much the Fallout aesthetic combined with the current cyberpunk aesthetic. You're going to see bubbled cities, domed cities. They kind of did this in Appleseed, but you're going to have like extremely secluded cities where you're still going to have that very believable social inequality because everything is so isolated, because the outside world is either ravaged by war, ravaged by nuclear war, or ravaged by climate change, or all of the above. I think that's what we're going to see moving forward. Like, I think we're also going to see this. I think one thing that I've been thinking about lately is, the pandemic. Like, we're living through a pandemic right now. We're all isolated. And we don't get to see each other, right? We don't get to go to cons. I don't know when I'll ever get to meet Jeremy in person, because Jeremy, you're the closest to us, because I know I can see Kiana, Steve, and Agatha when things get better, but when can I see you? Or when can I ever meet Jamie in person?
Right.
Right? But Jeremy, like, you're pretty close. You're like,
Yeah.
you're just down in New York.
Yeah.
But like, this pandemic has changed the way that we interact with one another. It's created this sense of loneliness that many people are feeling. Many of us,
And also communication only via screen.
right? And we live in, for the most part, like, fairly confined spaces. We don't go outside. We're not allowed to see our friends. We're very careful about what we eat, right? But we're also weary of people who are not in our close social circles. And I wonder if those kinds of themes are going to find their way into science fiction in the future. I know there's that really bad movie that Michael Bay made that's coming out. That's basically about COVID. And I'm like,
Don't watch it.
don't watch it. Don't give
Fuck
them their
that.
money. Fuck that. That's just, ugh.
But exploitative bullshit.
It's super
Exploitative,
and not even
100%.
in an artistic sense. It's just terrible. But like, what are we going to see in the future with regards to how disease factors in? We all thought that, like, the Black Plague, the Spanish flu, that could never happen again. And it's almost been a year since some of us have been to work.
There's a subset of cyberpunk, sometimes called biopunk, that often deals with like biological technology and like biohacking and kind of like human manipulation. And it's sort of underexplored, but I think like we'll probably be seeing more of that. Like, how does humanity respond to biological threats? How might a human body shield itself from biological threats via modifications or whatnot?
Katie in the chat just brought up Gattaca. With
Gattaca.
Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman. Great movie.
So, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of that. And I think like just from, cyberpunk, it should really be a genre that, explores the sense of identity as, we're talking about it today with, the gender spectrum and, basically people deciding, well, do I identify with, being male? Do I identify with being female? Do I identify with any gender at all? Like, I think those are all themes that are ripe for exploration in a cyberpunk setting. And I would really like to see the genre delve into these topics. And I almost feel as if a lot of the people, including the folks that made Cyberpunk 2077, they'll be like, oh, that's too radical for us to look at. We're going to stick with your dad's Cyberpunk as it's nicely has been established.
Despite their company motto of
1991, where we're talking about the fear of a Japanese future. No, the world is so much. There's so many other things to investigate with this genre, and I just feel like they're not being investigated.
Well, because nobody's actually being punk. Nobody is actually trying something new. Everything that people put out, every single cyberpunk property that you see come out is just the most vanilla shit. They aren't really exploring the things that we are talking about now. And like, you're totally right. Like gender identity should be, a core part of these futures that we are envisioning. And right, if I think one of the things about cyberpunk that, we haven't talked about yet is hope. What do we want the future to be like? And how can these institutions prevent us from achieving that future? And how can we as characters, how can we as protagonists, rise up to build the future that we want, right? And how do people hold us back?
Yeah.
So,
And I feel
Jamie,
like,
yeah.
Sorry.
I was gonna say I absolutely want to fucking hear what you have to say about this. Like, I'm so excited.
Yeah, because like for me, because we've been talking about fear a lot, and then Daniel, you just brought up hope, and like when I made Balikbayan, I felt like a core element of it had to be hope. Because I feel like when people talk about cyberpunk, like one of my dear friends, Phil, he was talking about how like the problem with cyberpunk and the reason why it fell out of fashion was because, and this is before 2020, this is before the technology that you talked about, Daniel, and stuff, but like people were like saying, oh, you know, cyberpunk, it was meant to be a warning, right? The warning of the outsider, the warning of Japan, the warning of China.
A cautionary tale about Asia.
Yeah, exactly, a cautionary tale. And so now it's like, well, we don't need that cautionary tale anymore because we are here, right? And so cyberpunk is no longer important. And even Philip K. Dick himself talked about like, oh no, it was less Philip K. Dick and more, I'm blanking on the name, Mona Lisa Drive author, also like worked on a lot of like essential
Oh
books.
God.
Aidoru, like that was another.
William
Yeah,
Gibson.
like, there you go, William
Yeah,
Gibson. Yeah,
Neuromancer.
yeah. So William, yeah, Neuromancer really considered super essential for cyberpunk and stuff. But he said he was having difficulty writing because he could no longer imagine the technology advancing, right? Because it was moving so quickly. Even though arguably the iPhone does not change from year to year. I mean, other things, other parts of technology are moving so quickly that a lot of creators couldn't keep up. So it fell away that cyberpunk could no longer be a cautionary tale and it could no longer be about technology. So what can cyberpunk offer us? And I feel like a core part of it is that hope, right? And so if we take away the cyberpunk story from people who are part of the system, who are afraid of the other, if we give these cyberpunk stories to people who are more like us, right, then cyberpunk becomes a genre of hope because we want to rebuild the system. We want to rebuild ourselves. We want to rebuild how we are perceived and how we present, right, in all of those things. And so like one of the core elements of Balikbayan was I felt like the characters couldn't be human, that they had to be elementals, that they had to be machines, because I wanted to like place the players in the place of other constantly, right? And they had to think about like, how are people trying to use me? Or how can I convince people that we need to change the city? Or how can we still save the city because I still love it? One of my favorite parts of Balikbayan the game is like, every single time I run the game, like half of the sessions are just people like sitting and arguing about what revolution is and what the future should be. And I think that's a key component because when we try to imagine a utopia and imagine a better world, we don't all necessarily agree on what that is. So I think cyberpunk as a genre helps us figure out what that better world is supposed to look like.
Yeah,
But yeah.
definitely. You articulated it way better than I could have ever done that. And I know that Steve and a whole bunch of other people have put Balikbayan in the chat. If you're watching this on YouTube, of course, the best way to watch the wrap-up is live on Twitch, twitch.tv/AZNSRep. Yeah, I don't think we shut ourselves up enough. I think it's important that we, share this platform and share the work that we do and the emotional labor that we do. That said, we're kind of coming into the tail end of our stream. We've kind of talked about things that we want in our cyberpunk. We want hope. We want climate change, that biopunk as well. But what are some works of cyberpunk that you like? And, at the beginning of this, we always talk about what we recommend. And I think a structure that might be better for the wrap-up is we wrap it up with stuff that we like. Right? So switch it up. We wrap up that dumpling, wrap up that shawarma for Amar, wrap up the summer rolls, all sorts of different things you could wrap up. But one of the things I think we should wrap this up with is what we really like. And wouldn't be part of the One Shot Network if we didn't shout out Neoscum. Shout out to Neoscum. But what are some things that we like? And I'll start with one thing that I really like, and it's this movie Upgrade. And I keep talking about it, but I love Upgrade. I think Upgrade is a fantastic cyberpunk movie because it focuses on the individual and it focuses on one specific aspect of the cyberpunk genre that still feels relevant to us, and it's that loss of autonomy. Yep. It's about this guy who is very much into past technology, but because of an accident, he becomes paralyzed from the neck down. And he gets implanted with this chip that would allow him to move again. But this chip has an AI in it. And the AI begins to take over his body and kill people.
The AI is SpongeBob SquarePants, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. But it's a fantastic movie. It's like content warning. It's super violent, very graphic violence. But it's a fantastic movie because it really makes you think about how we interact with technology. So that's my recommendation. Go watch Upgrade. I believe it's on Netflix.
The gore, in my opinion, is actually part of like
I
the
love
storytelling.
I love it. I think it's super important for it to be violent and scary because every time there's an action scene or every time he kills someone, because that's like, is it him or is it the AI, kills someone, the main character's like, oh my God, what's happening? And he's being freaked out constantly by this gore. And I think it's really important to have that in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. So that's mine, Upgrade. Who wants to go next? Steve.
Yes, I always volunteer. So something we have not talked about on this particular stream, because obviously our scope is like pretty narrow, is Afrofuturism or Afropunk or whatever you want to call it. So here's my hard copy of Summit of Kings by Brandon Dixon. So part of like the whole Swords Fall kind of like mythos. I'm not someone who like really absorbs too much Afropunk, Afrofuturism media. And I really should, because it's fucking balling as hell. Brandon Dixon does amazing work. And I think that is a very fresh take on kind of some of the themes we've talked about from a completely different lens that is absolutely valid and something that needs to be talked about like so much more. So that is my recommendation, that if this conversation was meaningful to you, absolutely check out not only Swords Fall, but just Afrofuturism in general, because there's a lot to be said about that particular vector of oppression and what it means to imagine a future where it doesn't happen. Specifically, if you're looking for like a source right now, go check out Motherland's RPG. They stream every Sunday night. It is absolutely wonderful, and it will expand your mind, guaranteed, on that.
Heck yeah. Who wants to go next? Any other recommendations?
Oh, I do.
Agatha, go.
My recommendation is for Jammy's game.
Tell me more.
I wanted to do this before Jammy talks, because that's my rec, which is Balik Bayan, and it is a sick game. Actually, we should get Jammy to
play it on stream.
To facilitate it for us.
Yeah, I'm working on a new version, so I'd love to run it for you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. Let's do Cyberpunk on Asians Represent.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay. It is so sick. Everyone should go check out that itch page, because I've been looking at it for so long now, and I'm just like scrolling through, looking at everything, listening to I'm a real fangirl of Jeremy. So anyway, just been listening to like there's like a Plus One Forward episode that talks about it as well, and it's just it really does touch on all the themes. I mean, I don't need to say anymore from everything that everyone has talked about on the stream, but like all the things that you talk about when you talk about cyberpunk, but it's also just so Asian. Like it is from such a strongly Asian perspective, and I think it's an amazing way to kind of open your eyes about like all of the issues with cyberpunk and all of the potential when you can see it from like a different, like a game written from a different perspective. That was what really blew my mind when I was checking it out. So every part of it is just so steeped in Filipino folklore that I think just recommend.
Let's just play it on stream then. We'll do a stream. We'll figure it out. We'll run it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm trying to not cry. I'm also blushing. Thank you so much, Agatha. But yeah, can I go next? Because I also want to recommend Kiana's game.
This is amazing. Okay, I love this fucking like gamify this fucking like wrap up.
Because like so Kiana worked with Jason to work on O Maker, and it's like a Descended from the Queen game, and I love it because it's so easy to pick up. And then plus, like what Kiana and Jason did was they connected to a poker deck, so you could use that if you don't have the cards. I really love that. And I love it because it's such a beautiful, sublime game that really helps you develop the idea of what does it mean to be human, what does it mean to live in this world. And the replay value is so huge because you can pick a different creator each time, and then there's always a question of like, so are you going to fight back against the creator? In another way, are you going to fight back against this world and claim your identity? Like every time I play this game, it's been such an amazing experience. I love it so, so much. And I feel like it really encapsulates so much of what makes Cyberpunk special in such a, it's so hard to pull off like good game design in a simple way, right? So I thought that Maker really did that well. So, but yeah, I am also like a fan person of Kiana. So.
Oh no, go around here, aren't we?
Good. Yeah.
Good. You should. Everyone should. Kiana's amazing.
More bumping up fucking our own voices in this community.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
And I do want to shout out Jason, who's in the chat right now, who's my collaborator on that game. He I came to him, I was like, how do I do Cyberpunk and Descended from the Queen? And he was like, here, just hold on a second. And he came back with 52 prompts in like a day. And I'm like, excuse me, where the fuck?
In a day? You shitting what?
Jason is most excellent person.
Yeah, so yeah, we put stuff together real fast, but yeah. Yeah, I guess it'll be my turn because this is how it's going. Amir put this in the chat, but I do want to shout out not one particular game, but the Asian Cyberpunk Jam that's going on. I am a co-host of that game jam alongside many amazing people in the space, such as WH Arthur or Errol Ether or and Banana Chan and a bunch of really cool people. It is an amazing jam. So it's a tabletop jam. Where basically we're looking for Asian creators, whether that means you have Asian heritage or you live in Asia and you don't consider yourself an expat, and we want you to write a cyberpunk thing, whether that's a game or a setting or a hack or whatever else it is. And what I really appreciate about it is that they have a bunch of really cool resources. So if you are interested in researching more into cyberpunk and Asian themes and how Orientalism fits in, there's a great bunch of articles in there that you can go check out. But also what it does is that it makes Asian cyberpunk not just one thing. Because I think when people talk about Asian cyberpunk, they think of it as just like sort of one conglomeration, but Asian identities and therefore what we can create are so vastly varied, and especially in a genre like cyberpunk, where we talk about how Hong Kong's a big background, and yet Japan as a threat isn't there, and so there's all these different aspects, and we're really interested in seeing what people are going to be creating, and there's already really awesome submissions in there of what people are making, and it's not games about being Asian. There are going to be games that are about being Asian. I'm making one that is kind of about that, but they're also just people who are just like, make a bunch of NPCs, and it's an incredible jam, and it's running for another month and a half basically. So please check it out and follow it and boost it. If you haven't, there's a hashtag and everything as well. And if you're an Asian TTRPG creator, consider joining it, even if you haven't done something before, because it's a really, really cool opportunity to bring in the Asian back into cyberpunk.
Bring the Asian, yeah.
Let us
bring the Asian.
So I'll put links to that in the description of the YouTube video, so you can get links to Balik Bayan, you can get the links to the Cyberpunk Jam, you get links to Kiana's game. I also want to shout out Kiana, Salty Sweet Games. We played a Lady Blackbird hack, a Cyberpunk hack that you're writing, and I really enjoyed that. I think it's on your YouTube channel, right?
Yep, it's on the YouTube channel.
Okay.
We did a fundraising stream for the Asians Asian American Legal Fund at the time of COVID. So yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
I wish so badly I could have joined the jam. Real life has gotten in the way, and like I can't really commit that kind of time, and I need to reclaim that from like myself. But I already had like 2 ideas for game jams, and I'm just gonna say them out here because anyone can like make this happen in reality. Like I'm gonna put this energy into the universe, and if it manifests, I love it. First idea I had for this game jam, which I'm not participating in, is a For the Queen hack where you're with the queen is actually a corporation, and when the game ends it's the corporation collapsing on itself. So the questions are like, how has the queen starved people? How has the queen and like it's like various amounts of like harm the queen has done, and the queen is of course the corporation itself, and the game ends when the corporation finally falls. And a lot of the questions also like, how have you tried to like reconcile that? Very like high level and whatnot. The other idea I had that I really wanted to do has escaped me. We're gonna move on.
Oh, but I want to say real quick, the beauty of a jam is you can submit something that you just started and be like, I'm gonna come back to this, right? So what I love about the Itch.io jam scene is it encourages you to not have a perfect, finished thing, but you can keep working on it with the community. So, I mean, if you wanna,
You should do it.
Good idea. It's
Maybe
good. I will absolutely keep it in mind.
Maybe we'll host like an Asians Represent Jam or something.
oh yeah,
Maybe we'll do
super
something.
cool.
We'll figure it out. There's so
Hey.
many things to do.
Yep.
I want to give a recommendation.
Yeah.
So going back to like Cyberpunk 2077 and video games for a second, if you don't want to play Cyberpunk 2077, if you don't have a computer that can run it, or if you don't want to shell out money for like the PS5 or the new Xbox, there's lots of good indie Cyberpunk games on
Super
Steam
good
that
indie
are
games, yeah.
really worth checking out. There's a whole bunch of them. There's one that I quite liked playing around the holiday seasons because technically a Christmas game, which is Valhalla Cyberpunk Bartending
I was
Adventure.
also thinking, wow,
Yeah,
how
or
it's so
rather
good, yeah.
VA11 Hall A. And it's a game where you mix drinks and change lives, or rather you play as this character named Jill who works at a bar in a cyberpunk city. And it's a visual novel, and you just talk to people that come into your bar, you mix drinks for them, and you learn about the world and the cyberpunk things going on in the world, like the corporations, like people figuring out what their identities are, like, conflicts with the government via these conversations. And in between shifts, you go back to Jill's apartment and you read the news and you post on forums, and it takes place over the course of a month, and you learn more about Jill as a character and her relationships with the people around her via this very simple concept that is quite potent, I think, because it takes cyberpunk away from this has to be about hackers diving into some big corporation's hideout and stealing secrets. It's just about regular people, which I think is something the future of cyberpunk can deal more with. We are living in a cyberpunk world right now where us regular people are stuck communicating via screens, and that's how we often, like I haven't met Daniel and Steve or any of you guys in person, and I know you guys through these images on screens. And so playing a game like this, you will get to know the characters that you interact with at the bar via talking with them and making drinks for them. So I recommend anyone who wants like a holiday cyberpunk game to pick it up on Steam. It's also got really good music, really great synthwave music, which is something that I wish the Cyberpunk 2077 soundtrack had leaned into. Because the soundtrack for Cyberpunk 2077 is very like dark techno and pulsating kind of sounds, and I wish there was more joyous.
Yeah.
Speaking of joyous music, I've got a recommendation. I'm just going to read you the description. It is many years into the future. A wealthy and powerful person or persons has claimed a rare and much sought after prize, the vault of 200 unreleased songs from renowned Canadian pop artist Carly Rae Jepsen. It's called Boy Problems, written by Colin Cummings, who is from Toronto. So Boy Problems is on itch.io. It's not an Asian creator, as far as I know, but like a cool music TTRPG. Steve, did you have a recommendation?
A recommendation. So I guess I had started this with like my ideas for like the Asian Cyberpunk Jam, and I finally remembered my last like idea, my last thought baby here, and it is a GM-less game You just play the character. You just do character creation. You go online. You go to LinkedIn.com and you print out your LinkedIn profile. And the game gives you prompts as to how you are not representing yourself in truth. So example questions are like, do you have a disability and have you hidden it? If so, cross something out and replace it with your disability. And it continues through those questions, and you draw these questions from like a pool of like, I don't know, 20, and you do like 4 or 5 of them. And LinkedIn profiles are like pretty static, so you can actually give guidance as to like where the play areas are. So for example,
wish I could play that.
Yeah, and it would be a game where no GM and you're the player just for player creation, and then that's it. But the impact is that it's your LinkedIn profile.
This is like a cool business card RPG. You can put this on a business card and hand it out to everyone. You could go to like say a business convention or whatnot. You can just hand out your card and be like on the back. It's like go to your LinkedIn profile and see if you're being genuine.
Yeah, I'm too fucking chicken shit to do that in a professional setting.
I can't do it because my employer owns LinkedIn.
Oh yeah,
So I can't do that.
Valid.
Pretty
Valid.
cyberpunk.
That's pretty cyberpunk.
That's pretty
Oh my
cyberpunk.
gosh.
The real cyberpunk was all the LinkedIn profiles we saw along the way.
Yeah.
I want to say like the business card idea, it'd be cool if each business card is a different like instruction and then you build it up together with people. Very cool. Very nice.
Yeah.
You form your crew.
I was talking about this where like the punk aesthetic is like the reclamation of like these things, these artifacts we've done to put us ourselves in like buckets and boxes and whatnot. And I really like the idea of the punk aesthetic of taking those and reclaiming them. And LinkedIn for me is a big one where like we can reclaim LinkedIn, but it's not going to look like LinkedIn as you know it. Anyways,
It's going to be LinkedIn
You wanted a
Sales
recommendation.
Navigator.
you wanted a recommendation from me. So my recommendation for Cyberpunk is not Cyberpunk as people really recognize it, but it resonates with me when I think of the themes. And it is Earthbound for the Super Nintendo in 1995.
Nice.
And the reason is because a lot of the themes we've talked about are harkened in Earthbound for children, really. So you don't get like this body modification really until the very end, but you do get this idea that the system you live in is actually not great for you. The system you live in actually kept you in like a system that perpetuated your oppression, whether you are a woman or you are an ethnic minority. And if you're white, as the main character is, you actually benefit from a lot of things that other people don't benefit from. That is very nuanced in the gameplay mechanics. So if you look at who gains power and how they gain power, you will see that there's a difference between how women and visual minorities gain power. And at the very end of it, you'll explore the idea of what it means to be a human meat body and what it means to be human and what that sacrifice can mean for different people. For a 1995 kids game, that's deep as hell. So my recommendation goes to Earthbound for the Super Nintendo.
Solid recommendation.
Solid recommendation. I know, Jeremy, you love classic games.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know what? I think this stream has reached a natural conclusion. I don't want us to drag it out, because I know that there are different time zones in play here. So I want us to conclude with just like this is where you can find me on the internet. We have all of our social handles on the overlay, but I just want to I just want you folks to remind the audience why you're so awesome. I want to start with Agatha. Who are you? Then why should people be following you on the internet right now?
I am the co-host of Asians Represent the podcast. I was gonna say one of the co-hosts because one of the co-hosts of this. Anyway, I do sensitivity readings and or cultural consultations, mostly cultural consultations for games. You should follow me on Twitter for my retweets of the Asians Represent tweets and or pictures of my cat. My cat recently, we've been taking cat pictures of her because we have a cat toy and we want to take pictures of her flying in the air, and they're hilarious. I'm gonna post them later. Anyway, so follow me for that. It's at Mighty Shrimp.
Double Y.
With 2 Y's. Yeah.
Yeah. And let's go to the second co-host and somebody who like this stream would not be possible without you, Steve, because we were like, we should stream. And we started Asians Represent, and the first stream was you and I. Just chilling.
Asians Read?
Asians
It
Read.
was Asians Read Oriental Adventures.
Yeah, the
and,
very first stream we did. Like, I was streaming on my personal channel, which I haven't streamed at in a while, but like, we did our first Asians Represent stream on this channel with you and I.
It feels like it's been like 10 years ago since we did
I
that, but
know.
literally it happened this year.
I know.
That we read all of Oriental Adventures live.
And all of L5R then.
And all of
And-
L5R after that.
Yeah, and we had amazing guests, and we highlighted a lot of people thoughts and feels for their own internal Asian like experience, and it's been absolutely wild. And thanks for reminding me, because I am very grateful and wish to express this gratitude towards everyone who has been part of our Discord, has interacted with us on Twitter or other social media, and has just said that the work that you do through DMs or whatnot, the work that you do is important. And sometimes it's hard, because sometimes I don't want to make this a pity party. We do get harassment.
Yep.
And it is fine, because we are used to it at this point, because hey, when you're a POC, it's kind of like microaggressions are part of your daily life. But for all y'all who support us and give us the strength and energy to go through and continue our work, yeah, very thankful, and I have a lot of gratitude towards all of you.
But Steve, the question is, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on the internet at DEEM Steve, as DM Steve phonetically, where I post fucking me flexing. And every once in a while, I have like a very insightful post where I'm like, I dislike this thing in this RPG, and here is why, because of Orientalist themes. But generally, it's just me posting thirst pictures, I guess.
Get those thirst pictures. DM doesn't stand for Dungeon Master. It's slide into his
Slide
DMs.
into my DMs.
Steve is also a best-selling author, one of the authors and editors of Unbreakable Volume 1, available at unbreakablерpg.com, drivethrurpg.com, and I think, no, not DM's Guild, just unbreakablерpg.com. Check that out. I know Volume 2 and a whole bunch of other things are coming out in the future, so check that out. Jeremy, let's go to you. What do you got going on?
Yeah, you can follow me on Pixel Grotto on Twitter, and also you can check out my gaming blog, where I've been writing about video games and more recently tabletop games since 2013. That's pixelgrotto.tumblr.com. I'm the last person in the world that still has a Tumblr and updates it regularly, writing long essays.
How punk of you! How punk of you!
Very, very punk of me. But yeah, I got into Cyberpunk, and I got into tabletop RPGs when I was living in Hong Kong, the Cyberpunk city. I think on my Instagram feed, if I scroll down far enough, there's at least one photo of the skyline that's hashtag like Cyberpunk, and I put a purple filter on it or something. And so I think that's kind of like both the genre that we've been talking about today, and also kind of the tabletop games that this channel often delves into mean a lot to me, because I got into them kind of at the same time, and I also realized a lot of things about them that I felt were worthy of loving, but also worthy of critiquing. And I think that kind of brings everything full circle in my perspective, whereas how I feel on like Cyberpunk, and whereas how I feel on some of the topics we've talked about in previous streams, like Dungeons and Dragons.
I look forward to you writing your first TTRPG and us playing it.
I think
really
I
look
will
forward
at some
to it.
point. Yeah, once I'm done the 3 freaking D&D
Yeah.
campaigns that I'm still DMing.
Play with us.
Yeah, you're doing
play.
so much. Well, here's the thing. Jeremy is going to be playing
I am
a
gonna
game
be
with
playing
us
with you guys.
because I think now's the perfect time to do it. We are doing one of Roll20's Rollvember shows on December 28th at 4 p.m. Pacific.
5
Shit.
PM Pacific time.
What was that?
2 p.m.
Steve?
Pacific time. 2
No,
p.m.
no,
Pacific.
I thought
so-
it was 4 p.m.
No, it's 2.
Whoa.
It's 2.
You know what? Follow us,
Yo.
AZNS Represent. We're going to give you the right date, but shit. But on December 28th, we're going to be playing a game. We don't know what game yet. But we were originally going to play For the Queen, but then they wanted audience participation for donations because it's a charity stream, and we were like, okay, let's do something different. Maybe we'll play a Cyberpunk game. Who knows? All I know is that we're doing something for charity for Roll20 on the 8th.
And it's on the 28th.
On the 28th. And Jeremy's going to be a part of it. Speaking of you playing a lot of games. That said, speaking of somebody who plays a ton of games, Jamie, you were like, I play 5 to 7 games a week sometimes at their peak. Where can people find you on the internet? Because that is like quite the feat.
God,
And
I
what
thought,
do you
I
do?
thought I was busy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I just love games way too much. So you can find me on Twitter at Temporal Hiccup. The name Temporal Hiccup is actually from my partner. That's how he described Max Payne, the video game. Like, it's a temporal hiccup. Anyway, that's where it came from. I felt like I had to say it. I post a lot of Sailor Moon GIFs. And you can also find me on Itch at Temporal Hiccup as well. You can hear me on the Gauntlet podcast where I talk about all the games I play. And I play most of my games at the Gauntlet community. So it's a very cool space. They really encourage a lot of indie people. I unleash my playtests on the Gauntlet a lot of the time. So I encourage indie creators, if they want to check it out, there's a way that you can participate. Let me know if you want me to hook you up, and if you want to get through it, I'd love to help you out. And I think, I do want to focus on the very difficult task of hyping myself up. A reason why you should follow me, I think it's because I am so determined to make this space more inclusive. I am so determined to have more of us and our voices. I feel like the future of TTRPGs and in everything is really in us. I really want to reclaim that narrative for us and to really explore, because I keep getting such good feedback on my games. I keep getting inspired by other people's games. And I think it's really important that more of us create and more of us work together. And so I'm determined to be a part of that. And I'm determined to support whoever wants to be a part of that. So hang out with me on Twitter.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. So happy to have met you. I'm so happy that you're part of this community. You're awesome. Shout out to the Gauntlet at Gauntlet RPG on Twitter, gauntlet-rpg.com. Gauntlet, they're such great folks. They do some great things. Asians Represent could have been on the Gauntlet. It was just like, who do we choose? And we ended up just going with one shot. But the Gauntlet is just another amazing space. Also, we mentioned Plus One Forward, like Toronto Represent, Plus One Forward, great PBTRPG podcast. Last but not least, Kiana. What are you up to?
A lot of shit that hopefully I can't talk about right now. But yeah, I'm Kiana. I do a lot of TTRPG shit on the internet. I write, I stream, all that good stuff. Twitter at Kiana S is the best way to kind of figure out what I do, because I talk about it, whatever I do. But I guess the most things, I'm one of the co-producers of Salty Sweet Games. We are a TTRPG and video game channel. We do weekly streams, including right now we've got a Pulp Cthulhu game, which I am a player in, and the Burn Bright campaign that I am the GM for will be coming back in the new year. So we've got some awesome stuff there. We've got Twitch, we got YouTube, all Salty Sweet Games. If you want to check out that Lady Blackbird hack of Cyberpunk that I did, and I GM'd and I kind of hacked, it's on our YouTube channel. So if you're looking into that, I do have my Itch.io page, which is Kiana S again, which is where I self-publish some stuff. And again, please check out stuff like the Asian Cyberpunk Jam, because there's a lot of cool stuff coming out there. I do a lot of things happen all the time. And also, you may hear my voice sometimes here on this channel. I am Empress Josha on the Dungeons and Asians. So if you'd like to hear more of my voice on the Asian Represent space, that's where to find me. I just cause gay panic. That's what I do.
Oh my god.
It's great.
Best kind of panic.
It's great. That said, if you folks want to stay on top of all things Asians Represent, if you have ideas for topics for the wrap up, which is our like fast news topic of the week sort of show, you could follow us at AZNS Represent on every platform except for Twitch, where it's AZNS Rep. Our YouTube channel, thanks to all of you, we're now over 1,300 subscribers, which is like crazy. I can't believe we're at that, and it's all thanks to y'all, and we're almost at 1,000 followers on Twitch. So happy for the love and support that you've all given us. So yeah, check us out on all of our social platforms. If you have suggestions for topics that we can discuss on the wrap up, the best place to let us know is on our Discord. Steve, if you could drop the link. We are currently accepting, I think the number is like 42
40.
more.
It's 40 exactly.
40 more members of our Discord. The only way to join is during our Twitch streams. So join our Discord. Let's talk about all things Asians represent, video games, stuff like that. Yeah, I'm super happy that we have that Discord server and super thankful for all of our mods and our fellow admin Pam, who is not on the stream right now, but Pam is just so amazing, the Dovetailer. You could also follow me because I realized that I haven't shouted myself out, and we're trying to do that now. You can follow me on Twitter at Daniel H. Kwan. It's Daniel H. Kwan on pretty much all social platforms. Don't bother following me on Instagram because all I post are pictures of my Warhammer minis that I'm painting in quarantine.
Good content. I follow you on Instagram.
But Daniel H. Kwan on all things. I have a Patreon where I am currently working on Chinese campaign setting, publishing bits and bits of it. It's leading up to a bigger project that I'm going to involve a whole bunch of creators in, so I'm excited. This month, I am releasing a video for my series Anything But D&D, talking about online gaming platforms, comparing to Roll20 and Owlbear Rodeo. So I'm excited to do that and release a holiday adventure where you go to try to kidnap the master craftsman Alabaster, who is revolting against Santa Claus. So I'm very excited to release that and do all sorts of things. I have an itch store, danielhquan.itch.io, where I post my system agnostic Chinese TTRPG stuff. That being said, if you're watching on YouTube, please make sure you like, subscribe, hit that bell icon so you get notified when we go live. The wrap-up is streamed live every Friday. If you're watching it right now, thank you. Every Friday on Twitch at 7 p.m. Eastern, and it goes live on YouTube Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern. So thank you folks for tuning in. Kiana, Jamie, Jeremy, thank you for joining us as our guests. I'm so grateful that we get to have these conversations. Once you're on the wrap up, you can be on the wrap up anytime you want. So if you got a topic that you're passionate about, or if I'm like, this week we're going to talk about this and you want to be on it, let's make it happen. Again,
Daniel, do you have a short list as to what next week might bring?
Sure, yeah, I do.
You actually?
Yeah.
I thought I was like putting you on the spot. No, you have a list.
Steve, come on, please, come on.
Oh my god, when Daniel's on vacation,
Steve looked like he had a gotcha face.
You were like, gotcha.
I know, right? Yeah, I was like, yeah, I got you on stream. But no, Daniel is always
well.
here.
First of all, next week's
reverse
Christmas.
Uno card.
Christmas, Steve. That was an easy answer. Next week's Christmas.
Fair.
But so there is going to be no wrap up. Because I'll be spending time with my family. That being said, I would like to do something on Christmas Eve in our Discord and do like a hangout, like an all-day hangout since I'm on vacation, chill in and all that. I also think tonight
Y'all, did you forget Daniel's on vacation?
I'm on vacation, so I'm gonna work. Yeah, but in terms of episodes, I do have it all laid out. So let me. I don't want to. No, that'll mess everything up. Yeah, so January 1st, New Year's, because it kind of messed up my overlay. But anyways, January 1st, New Year's, I want to talk about sensitivity readers. And I specifically want to talk about the response to sensitivity reading in the latest Conan the Barbarian Kickstarter. So I want to talk about that. And I have and I'll say this now, we have our first non-Asian guest scheduled for the wrap-up. But it's for a particular reason. On January 8th, Chris Spivey has agreed to come on the show to talk about that sort of controversy with casting Matt Mercer as an Asian person in his Haunted West actual play. I worked on Haunted West, and I know that Chris didn't do it maliciously or anything like that. So I would love to give Chris a platform to discuss this, do like a postmortem, and talk about representation in the Wild West. So we're actually going to do, Chris will be the first non-Asian guest of the wrap-up and Asians Represent. So yeah. Also, tomorrow is the third Saturday of the month. That means Al-Qadim is back. Critical read, led by Amar. That book is just like they're going slower through that book than we did through Oriental Adventures. It's got that many problems at the beginning. It's like we're just gonna front load the game with problems and then ease off as we go. So yeah, check out Al-Qadim. That will go live on Wednesday if you're watching on YouTube. But anyways, thank you Somo. Thank you, Somo. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of The Wrap Up. Agatha, Steve, it's a pleasure to do this every week. Jeremy, Kenna, Jamie, thank you for joining us. And to you, the audience, if you're watching live or on YouTube, thank you for joining us. I hope this brings you value, and we'll see you for The Wrap Up in the new year. Bye, everyone.